Hello.
Hi, Elspeth. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. I'm good.
Is this your
Good.
first live with another person, or have you done it before?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant! Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
And I
only done it
wasn't
once
sure
or
if it was
twice
going to
myself.
work.
Yeah. So we've got about half an hour, and I thought it'd be a wonderful opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, to introduce Elspeth, who's the author of this brand new book that came out last week, I think. Smooth Sailing with Your Teen: Mindful Parenting on the Journey to Adulthood. It's quite a substantial book, as you can see, and I
Uh-huh.
believe it's on a great special offer on Kindle as well. So if people want to buy it on an
Yeah.
ebook, it's a great deal available. So you can check it out on Amazon maybe after this call. And I think I'll start by just reading, as people are joining in, just reading the bio for Elspeth. She's a mindfulness and ACT coach, acceptance and commitment training coach, and a parent of teens who lives in Edinburgh in Scotland. Born and raised in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and moved to Scotland in '97 to complete an MSc while training to be an architect. And now she's the mindful parenting architect. Then sidestepped into HR resourcing in the construction energy sector for 16 years and thrived in this role until the loss of both parents and a divorce in the space of 5 years. Mindfulness gave Elspeth renewed purpose in life, and in 2017 she left the corporate world to take time out with her children, and then from there she trained to teach mindfulness and began to share mindfulness-based living course. And then in 2020 she co-authored a book that our community did together called Mindfulness for Challenging Times, and also Mindfulness for Transformation. One of those was written during the pandemic as is kind of a gift for people going through the challenge then. And she loves spending time at the beach with her golden retriever and can often be found with sea glass and dog biscuits in her
Yeah.
pockets. Love it.
Just don't get them mixed up.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us, Elspeth.
Thank
Um,
you.
so I thought we'd maybe just have a bit of an informal conversation and a bit of a chat about this book. And maybe the first question is, what prompted you to kind of focus on this subject of mindful parenting? What prompted you to do that?
Yeah. So I think I started writing the book about 2 years ago, and I was trying to think back, and I think at that time I was homeschooling. It's a bit of a blur. I've tried to block most of that out. But yeah, I think at the time it was really intense. I could see how my teens were suffering at the time, how the impact of them isolating from friends was affecting them. And I think our relationship just became really quite intense. You know, I was with my teens every day, and I was speaking to parents of other teens, and I think a lot of these challenges were there already. I think there was a lot. There was what we call the kind of teenage mental health pandemic was there before COVID was ever a thing. But I think the lockdown really amplified that. So that was the context in which I started writing.
Mm.
And I think it was just because really being a teenager nowadays is really tough.
Yeah.
And therefore parenting teens becomes really tough too.
Mm.
And I wanted to share a little story with you, if that's okay, just to kind of look at how things have changed so much since I was a teenager. And if I go back, I think it was about 30 years ago, and my kids would say it was back in the dinosaur age. I was at school studying German for business, and my teacher came in one day and said, I've got some really exciting news for you, and we're going to send a letter through the computer to a school in Germany. And we kind of looked confused. She said it's called electronic mail. And I think I was about 17 at the time. And we were a bit confused. We thought, okay, let's go with it. And we sent this letter through the computer to the school in Germany. And it took 1 week for us to get a
Really?
reply. And yeah. And so we got a reply to our computer
Yeah.
in Belfast. And that was quite astonishing back then. But it was one whole week. And I kind of, I compare that to my daughters now and the pressure that they feel under to respond to messages as they come in. And they kind of talk about they've left me unopened, or if they don't respond to somebody within 1 minute, it's a problem.
Wow.
So I think for me, that's just a small example for me how in the last 30 years the pressure in that sense has increased. And obviously we know that social media has brought the world closer to our teens, so everything's instant, and I think everything's immediate, everything, it feels more pressurized in lots of different ways. And yeah, it just feels that as a parent that then becomes tougher, and we need to be able to respond to that. So
so that sense of communication and wanting that immediate response is one of the many pressures that they're going through. And yeah, good point. As teens go through these challenges, that there's an immediate and obvious knock-on effect for the parents too, and so parents are thinking about how to help best manage that. And I noticed lots of books on parenting teens are coming out, because probably trying to meet that need of the difficult challenge right now. Okay, so what, you know, we talk about mindful parenting, and you also talk about ACT. Do you have any, like, if you think about, if someone asked you, like, you know, what does it mean, mindful parenting? What would you say? What would you want to share there? I know it's a big general topic, but what comes to mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, it means being aware of my own situation. So being aware of how I'm feeling right now. So am I tired? Am I hungry? Am I feeling slightly ill? You know, what's happening? Do I feel calm, or am I worrying about work? Am I worrying about finances? You know, what's going on for me? So really being tuned in to my present moment experience, and then being able to extend that awareness to my teenager. So what's going on for them? And then being able to listen mindfully to my teenager. I know one of them's watching. I've seen her name coming up, so she'll be checking to see that I do this later. So what's happening for them? What can I read the signs? You know, are they behaving differently? Are there signs that I should be picking up on? So really tuning into their experience too. And then another part to that for me is understanding what's going on in their brains, what's happening, what changes are taking place, and being able to take a step back and not react to certain behaviors. So if they come across as being rude or impatient or lazy, or all of these labels that we often apply to our teens, understanding some of the behaviors that might, not always, but that might be, some of the reasons that might be underlying those behaviors. So do they struggle to get up in the mornings because it's their changing body clock? Or are they taking risks because teenagers are naturally impulsive and they've got all these extra dopamine receptors? So understanding, again, I think that comes into being present and knowing what's happening.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, wow, that's interesting. And I noticed that you wrote about being hangry, and you kind of that sense of hungry, angry. I think, is it hungry, angry, lonely, and tired? And you wrote a bit about that, and also how mindfulness can help. So, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think if we notice that we are feeling challenged, or we're having challenging experience, we then have choice. We can choose how we respond in each moment. So if we're behaving mindfully, we're less likely to react in a in an angry way or impatiently, or we're less likely to be frustrated because we're more tuned in to what's happening. So I think that really helps. That's one of the key benefits, I would say, from mindful parenting, is that we can build more connection with our teenagers because we're less likely to cause damage by exploding, when something triggers us, which could happen a number of times a day. So yeah,
no, totally understandable. And I think I remember reading something about how, let's say in a moment that we're feeling hungry, and so that's making us angry, realize that. But then there's something about, if we've done some mindfulness practice before, or if we kind of slow down and reflect or journal or something, we're less likely to be so reactive as well, even though we haven't actually eaten because there's no food around, for example.
Yeah, definitely. That was a really interesting study. So there were two different studies, and one was quite an amusing study, actually, about the voodoo dolls. And I'll let people discover that in the book. But
maybe you can say a little bit about it. That would be cool.
So the scientists looked at couples, and they invited couples to, at the end of each day, each couple had each partner had a voodoo doll with pins, and they were invited to put as many pins in the doll to represent how angry they were with their partner. And interestingly, the people with the lowest blood glucose readings put double the amount of pins in as those who had eaten, so their blood glucose levels were higher. But what was interesting then was another study showed that self-awareness was really key, because if we're aware, and you mentioned the study where people had journaled to begin with, and they were aware of how they were feeling, and they were tuned in to maybe any challenges they were experiencing, they were better able to choose their response. So that was really very interesting. If we're mindfully aware that we're hungry, we're less likely to react if we're triggered. So that was quite interesting research.
Really interesting. Yeah. It's fine. I could imagine that voodoo doll and people running out of pins. I need more pins. It's interesting how we could be very angry at a partner or a friend or whoever. We never associate it with one's blood glucose level, and yet you can predict how angry you're going to be by the levels of sugars in someone's system. It's amazing, isn't it? It's incredible. So having this, that's what I loved about it, having this awareness about how things work within our body can start to help us to become aware of why these emotions are coming up or behaviors coming up. And you wrote about the teens and the teen brain, or how teens are different to adults. Anything you want to say about that? About, you mentioned earlier about dopamine. Can you say a little bit about the teen brain and how maybe it's different to an adult's brain?
Yeah, definitely. So I think we like the use of metaphors in ACT, and I worked in the construction sector for a long time. So I think it's something that I really like is the idea of a teenage brain being a little bit like a building site. So if you imagine that you have, well, actually, we've got a shop down the road, which has been a bank, and it's changing to a veterinary practice. So it's going to become a vet's. So it's changing function, and the bank looks the same from the outside, but we've seen lots of rubbish coming out in skips, and it's not able to function as a bank anymore. And until the construction's finished, it's not going to be able to function as a vet's. And it just made me think it's a little bit like our changing child brain changing to become an adult brain. And this process of adolescence, or going through the change to become an adult brain, is a little bit like a construction site. So there's a lot of stuff being dumped that's no longer needed from the child. And there are new structures being put in place, there are new connections being made, there's new wiring going in. But while we're going through this construction phase, the brain isn't going to function as either a child brain or an adult brain. It's kind of somewhere in between.
Mm.
And that has really helped me as well, just to kind of understand that I'm not going to get a fully functioning adult brain when I'm talking to my teenagers, even if sometimes they might appear very adult. Later that same day, their behaviour might appear quite childish again. Not to be offensive, but we see this sort of flipping because the teenage brain's governed by the emotional system. We see this flitting, or I certainly see it as a parent. Sometimes our conversations are very grown up, and other times it's more challenging. So yeah, it's a process, and I like to think of it as a development process, a bit of a construction phase.
Yeah. And just having that awareness helps in that relationship, in that connection. So you can continue to have your usual expectations, I guess, but in the back of your mind, you're like, actually, you know, this is a teenager, and so they might be going through all sorts of challenges in their brain. So just for anyone who's joining us, we're talking about this new book that Elspeth wrote, Smooth Sailing for Your Teen. I guess the next question is, you know, you talk about mindfulness, but then you also mentioned ACT, and some people may not have heard of this acronym and its connection with being a parent. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, so ACT is a mindfulness-based training, or sometimes known as a therapy. So the letters ACT, actually pronounced ACT, stand for acceptance and commitment training, or as I mentioned, sometimes acceptance and commitment therapy. So I deliver it as a training, and I found it really life-changing for me to be able to take my mindfulness practice and learn then what was most important to me in my life, in all the different areas of my life, and then to be able to take action. That really made a big difference to me, to be able to feel like I was doing something valuable, to feel that my life had purpose. So then that naturally applies itself to my parenting relationship, so my relationship with my teenagers, and how so the kind of action part allowed me to tune into what's most important to me in my relationship with my teens. So how do I want to show up as a parent? And that's actually one of the sections in the book is how do you want to show up? What's most important for you? And I think knowing that there is no right or wrong, there is no good or bad, obviously that there's helpful and harmful, but different relationships, different parent-teen relationships will value different things. And I think I talk in the book about, you know, one parent might value spontaneity and another parent might value being organized. And one is neither right nor wrong. It's just what works for each different parent-teen relationship. There is value in being organized and there's value in being spontaneous. So it's taking a look at, I guess, stepping back from the shoulds. You know, as parents, we feel we're heavily guided by rules and rigid structures. We feel that there are ways to do things. But if you can actually tune into what's most important to you and your teen, you know, what works best in your relationship. And that might be, if somebody has more than one child, it might be different approaches for each child. Different methods work best, different values are important in each parent-child relationship. And I think that really helps to guide things. So yeah.
I can imagine how, you know, each parent can make this their own, because of they can think about what their values are. You know, if it's creativity or spontaneity, like you said, then they can be more spontaneous and more creative in the way that they relate to their teens and to themselves. And others, maybe it's to do with compassion or kindness or something else. So they can really, in a way, it's not like you have to follow this guide to be a mindful parent. It's helping parents to find what really gets them excited and gets them motivated, and living that, giving them permission to live that, which is quite unique, I think, for mindful parenting, because maybe people associate mindfulness with just meditation and being calm, but actually it's about living their values, whatever that means to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you tune into what your values are in your parenting relationship, you can then look at all the other areas of your life. So you might look at what's most important to me in my work domain, or what's most important to me in my health and fitness domain, or my hobbies and leisure area. And I think as parents, it's really important that we have purpose outside of the parenting relationship. It's really important that we have meaning elsewhere in our lives, because that makes us more whole as a person, and it allows us to bring more to the parenting relationship with our child. It also makes us better role models. And I think then that we can encourage our teens to find their values. They're just working out who they are and what they want and where they want to go in life. So it's more difficult for teenagers to uncover their values, but we can guide them and help them thrive, guide them towards what's most meaningful to them.
Yeah, so as the parent goes through the journey of finding their own meaning and purpose, they can also help their teenagers in that challenging moment too. Amazing. As I looking at the table of contents, it's kind of split up into being present, and you call that plotting the current position. And then the second part is opening up, welcoming all of your passengers aboard. And then part 3 is doing what matters, which I guess is to do with the meaning and the purpose element. Can you say a little bit more about the being present and the opening up element of mindful parenting, according to how you've written it?
Yeah, so being present, I guess, pairs 2 skills. So the mindfulness, so tuning into my present moment experience and doing that non-judgmentally. So the being friendly and bringing this warm attitude towards my present moment. That would be the mindfulness element. And then being able to take a step back is really helpful. That helps us almost zoom out of our situation and sometimes see things through our teens' eyes, and sometimes just see the situation from a completely different perspective. So it helps us to respond more effectively. And then the opening up. So at the end of part 1, we look at the typical ways that we might respond to challenges. So how do we tend to often avoid challenges in our lives? And I've come up with the acronym for the book, The Hazards of Avoiding Challenge. And that those are all the different ways in which we typically dealing with challenges. And everybody will recognize 1 or 2. They're not wrong. They're very typical ways that we behave, because we don't want to feel discomfort. We don't want to experience challenge. So we'll quite often use one of these methods to control how we feel. So that then leads on into opening up. And this is the ACT approach, this idea of being willing or turning towards our challenge rather than turning away from it. So allowing space for it. And in the second section of the book, I share techniques about how to allow feelings and thoughts to be present. And also something called cognitive diffusion, which you know all about, which is helping us to loosen our grip on thoughts that might take hold of us. So for example, we might have the thought, I'm a really bad parent. And if we allowed that thought to take over, or we were guided by that thought, we might just give up. We might just not make an effort to make any difference. We might just think there's no point in me trying, so I'll just not bother. Whereas if we can say, I notice I'm having the thought that I'm a bad parent, we create a little bit of space and a bit of distance between ourselves and the thought. And we notice we can still have that thought, but still do what matters. So I can still be caring. I can still, make my child dinner if she's still watching. So, even if I have the thought that I'm rubbish at this, I can take action along the lines of what matters most to me.
Yeah, fascinating. I love that. And I just found the page on hazards, so I can just read out the acronym if that's
Yeah,
okay.
great.
H is hiding away, so over avoidance. A stands for avoiding and suppressing thoughts and feelings. Z is for zoning out and numbing. A is for arguing with your thoughts. R is for rigid positivity. D is for distractions such as TV, social media, food, and so on. And S is self-criticism or self-bullying. So these are all the kind of avoidance strategies that you've created an acronym there of the different ways we avoid the difficult emotions. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, essentially. So difficult feelings that come up, that we might try to avoid.
Yeah. Okay. And in your journey of searching for this book, I think you've spent a couple of years researching it, writing it, editing it. Was there any kind of interesting insights that came to mind that you found, oh, wow, that was interesting research, or wow, having written this book and reflected on these things, maybe there's some changes that you've made as a parent? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, so much. There was so much. I got bogged down in the research. I got really intrigued by all of the stuff I was researching, and it's really, really helped me as a parent. So just learning about the brain, the teenage brain, and how it works and how it's different. So things like the melatonin, so the sleep hormone, kicks in later at night for my teenagers, and it wears off later the next morning. So that's helped me understand that if they're up late doing homework at midnight, it's not because they've left it to the last minute. It's because they still feel really wide awake. So when I used to get annoyed with them for not going to bed, I now understand why they're not going to sleep. So my conversation with them will be quite different. It's not as frustrated, it's more understand. But so that's really helped. And also that helps at the other end. So when they can't get up in the morning for school, I understand that they're struggling. And actually, I've chosen to bring my teens their breakfast every morning because I know that's going to help them get started. And once they've got that kickstart, they just do everything else themselves and they go on their own from there. But it's little things like that, just understand more about the differences in the teenage brain that have helped me then choose to change the way that I parent. So, yeah.
And so if they can't go sleep at night, do they say, it's not me, Mum, it's my melatonin?
My brain.
Do they know about this stuff as well, or they're not so interested?
They're quite interested in it all too. So and other things like the dopamine receptors I mentioned earlier. So we know that our teenagers like to take risks. Adolescent animals take risks. It's just part of it, happens in lots of different species. And one of the reasons is that the teenage brain has more dopamine receptors, so they need to feel that they're taking risks. So we can help guide our teenagers towards more adaptive risks, so we can help them thrive and take helpful risks, like plan a journey somewhere and make that journey on your own, rather than perhaps be climbing up on a roof or smoking or vaping or drinking or all of the other risks that are attractive to teenagers. So we can think about how we can sort of feed the dopamine receptors in more helpful ways.
Fascinating. Yeah. So you can, that's fascinating. What about, to finish with, and by the way, if anyone joining, we're talking about this new book, Smooth Sailing for Your Teen, which is on Amazon. And what about this idea of self-compassion or kindful element to has writing the book and reflecting on these ideas, has it helps to cultivate self-compassion? And maybe say a little bit about what's the role of self-compassion in all this, being kind to yourself as a parent?
Yeah, definitely. I think we often push ourselves really hard as parents to achieve or we feel that we have to perform in a certain way, and we can speak very critically or judgmentally to ourselves. And for me, learning that that actually has a detrimental effect. So if I speak harshly to myself, I'm going to experience shame. And I know then that shame shuts down pretty much everything in the brain. It's going to it's not going to make me feel motivated to take action. But I know that if I praise myself, which we're not very good at doing, but if I am kind towards myself, and if I offer myself compassion, so for example, this is a really challenging time. How can I best help myself right now? Who could help me? What do I need right now? If I can look after myself in that way, that makes me a better parent. It makes me better able to then look after other people. So I think just knowing that, and knowing that I can bring that attitude towards my children as well. If I praise them rather than criticize them, that's going to help them flourish and help them thrive, rather than thinking, I mean, a lot of people think that it makes us soft, or, you know, it's going to make our kids soft. We need to really challenge ourselves, and we need to challenge our children. And absolutely, yeah, we need to encourage our kids to thrive. But the way that we're best to do that, and the way that we're best to flourish ourselves, is to be self-compassionate. And that's really important to help us keep going, because it is a challenging time. They are challenging years, and I think it's really important. Compassion plays a huge part in that.
Sure. Yes. And I think all these different things that you've shared helps to cultivate compassion towards the teen, and also the compassion, understanding your own brain. Like, you know, as you mentioned about that, maybe it's to do with your blood glucose, or you've been very busy, or some there can be some other reason behind it. Fantastic, thank you. And I noticed Tosh is on here as well, who wrote one of comments in the back of your book, one of the endorsements, and she's released a book as well, Kindness for Conflict. So maybe we'll do a session on that in the future too. And also Shauna Shapiro, who's an author. So fantastic. Yeah, I've read this book and it's highly recommend it, especially if you're a parent of teens, but also very relevant even if you're a parent of younger children or older children. And even if you're not a parent, it's actually got a lot of strategies to help you understand your own brain and how to apply acceptance and commitment training and mindfulness. You'll learn, you know, there's new acronyms here and research that Elspeth has found. So yeah, highly recommend it. And I think it was in the top 3 actually this week in the hot releases or something for Kindle, wasn't it? So it's a popular book at the moment.
#1.
Yeah. It made it to #1, didn't it? Yeah.
For hot releases, it goes up and down. I don't check it too often, but I did notice it went to #1.
Yeah.
It's quite nice.
Congratulations for that. So yeah, do check it out. It's on a special offer at the moment because it's just come out. Smooth sailing for your teen. And if you enjoyed it, if you enjoyed our conversation, maybe leave a comment or a like or a heart or something. And yeah, maybe I'll try and, I don't know if it will save the recording, but if so, I'll try and share it somewhere else as well so people can check it out if they didn't manage to see the whole thing. But yeah, I can see Anna here. Hi.
Hi, Anna.
And a few
thank you.
People.
Jacqueline.
Jacqueline, yes. Mindful journaling. Fantastic. Great. Well, thanks. Is there anything else that you wanted to finish with saying? Maybe your website and how people can find out more about your work?
Yeah, so my website is pause2be.co.uk. And for anybody who has bought the book, there is quite a lot of additional material on the website. I'm going to keep adding to that. So some of the audios and some of the exercises can be downloaded there. And I've got some values cards coming out soon that can be used. Yeah. They're being produced this week.
Okay.
So they can be used on their own for anybody or alongside the book. So yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's where you can find me. I'm on Instagram, obviously, and on Facebook too.
Yeah. Fantastic. Forcetobe.co.uk, and there's other stuff that you could download there if you go to Elspeth's website. And also, I should say that, you know, if you want to publish a book yourself and you're into mindfulness, then also get in touch with me. We'll have a new program to help people publish a book in probably September. So do get in touch with me if you're interested in that. But thank you all for joining in and for listening and for your lovely comments. Thank you, Elspeth, for your time. And yeah,
thank you.
See you all soon. Bye.
Great. Thanks, Shanna.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye for now.